I would love to see the Orioles bring Anthony Santander back. But if they don't, and as Mike Elias has said, they're going to be looking for a right-handed hitting outfielder in free agency this offseason. So I'll give you my wish list of the top 6 players in free agency that fit that category coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Friday, November 15th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are going to take a look at the top free agent right-handed hitting outfielders out there. My wish list, the top 6 guys that are available that I think the Orioles should go after this offseason. We'll talk about some names that you definitely know, like Teoscar Hernandez and our old buddy Randal Grichuk, and maybe some names that you hadn't thought about as much for this potential opening for the Orioles. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. So it is the free agent right-handed hitting outfielders Orioles wish list for this offseason. Going to be doing these wish lists throughout the offseason, looking at every possible opening the Orioles may have on their roster. Now, I know when I did the free agent backup catcher wish list last week, I included James McCann in my top 6, and I get it. But a lot of that was because there's not a lot of great catchers that are out on the market. My number 1 guy on that list, Travis d'Arnaud, has already signed. He just signed a 2-year, $12 million deal with the Angels. I had James McCann number 2, so that boasts McCann to number 1 on my list for the Orioles to just bring him back and be Adley's backup. But another need that has even been mentioned by Mike Elias already this offseason is a right-handed hitting outfielder. And obviously, a lot of this hangs in the balance in whether or not the Orioles re-sign Anthony Santander. If they do, the Orioles are probably still looking for a right-handed hitting outfielder, but they're maybe looking for someone more in the Austin Slater ilk, someone to be the 4th or 5th outfielder, be a platoon bat, things like that. If they don't bring Santander back, we're looking for something much more substantial. And in this episode, we're kind of chatting with the assumption, not the assumption, but in a world where Santander is most likely not an Oriole, because the names I'm talking about are more everyday level players who would be more of a replacement for Anthony Santander. But let's start. I'm going to do a top 6 wish list, and we begin with number 6 on my list. That is Mark Canha. Mark Canha, 35-year-old right-handed hitting outfielder who spent the 2024 season split between the Tigers and then was one of the veterans that was traded away by Detroit. They sent him to the San Francisco Giants at the deadline. The free agency matrix, an amazing metric done by John Becker, an amazing spreadsheet done by John Becker over at FanGraphs, projects Canha to get a 1-year, $5 million deal in free agency this year. So what would be a pretty cheap deal for Mark Canha. Now, I see Canha as really the safe pick in this category, and that is why I have him at number 6. And quite frankly, Canha, I would say, is one of maybe 2 guys on this list who, if the Orioles did bring back Santander, it still wouldn't be shocking if they also added a guy like this, and I would put Canha in that category, and that's kind of why he is lower on the list, because I'm not sure at this point in his career he demands everyday at-bats. Now, for Mark Canha, he was basically a league average bat last year between his time with the Tigers and the Giants. He ended up with a 102 WRC plus in 125 games and 462 plate appearances. He hit 242 with a 344 on base, 346 slugging, 7 home runs on the year, an 11% walk rate, and a 21% strikeout rate for Mark Canha. And that's kind of the guy that Mark Canha is. He's always been a high walk, low strikeout guy. He still doesn't really chase much. He doesn't really swing and miss much. He has a really good eye at the plate, and that's something that's followed him even as he gets kind of into his mid-30s now. And he's not the player he once was, in his late 20s with the Oakland Athletics, but he's still been a productive hitter. Now, this was certainly the worst full season offensively of his career, of the 102 WRC plus. But hey, he's 35 years old, and his production really has dropped off the last two seasons. 2022 with the Mets, he had a 126 WRC plus. Then last year, split between the Mets and Brewers, went down to 111. And then, of course, 102 with the Tigers and Giants. He was really a very similar production player. He hit for a better average with San Francisco, but in like way, way less plate appearances. I mean, he went to the Giants and was basically fully a bench player. When he was with the Tigers, he was mostly an everyday guy for the first part of the season, had a 101 WRC plus, was basically a league average hitter. Now, Canha did hit 26 home runs back in 2019 with the A's, but he's never been a huge, like crazy hard hit exit velocity guy. But the issue with him the past 2 years, and especially in 2024, is that he's just not impacting the ball really at all. If you're watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, you can see here, this is Mark Canha's Baseball Savant page from the 2024 season, and you can see it. Like, he still squares up the ball, as I mentioned. It's a low chase rate, a low swing and miss rate. He walks really well, which still makes him productive at times. But you look at, the hard hit rate at 37%, the barrel rate at just 3.3%, average exit velocity at 88 miles per hour. He's not contacting the ball. That leads to an expected batting average of 214. And the one that's really concerning, look at that bat speed, 68.4 miles per hour on average. That is in the 11th percentile in bat speed in the big leagues. That's something that can tend to go away as players get older. And it seems like that's something that might be happening to Mark Canha, not that he was ever a big-time bat speed guy, most likely anyway. He still gets hits because he can square up the ball, but this all leads to a career low 346 slugging percentage. And you add to the fact that he had a ground ball rate of 49% this year. That was a career high, meaning he's hitting the ball on the ground more than ever, and that always leads to less production. There's just not a lot left in that bat. Now, he's still about league average defensively in the outfield. You're going to put him in a corner. Back in the day, he could play a little center field, but he's either a right fielder or a left fielder who provide you average, solid, dependable defense still in the outfield, even at age 35. He hasn't played center field in a couple of years, but he still does have above average sprint speed, which you'll certainly take in a guy like Mark Canha, who can still run around and go get a baseball in the corners if you need him to. I mean, he did hit much better against lefties this year than righties, 124 WRC plus. He's much closer to a platoon player at this point in his career. And that's kind of what he would be if the Orioles went after him. Like, if all the other options fail, if you can't bring back Santander and you can't go and get some of these better options, Canha could be a fallback guy. You could maybe platoon him in right field with Heston Kjerstad, and that could be your answer. If Santander's not back, it's not the most exciting thing the Orioles could do. But at the very least, he's kind of a guy with a high floor. I don't see his production getting any worse than last year. And he was still basically a league average hitter who can still play defense and who gets on base. That's someone who's still productive on your team. But honestly, you could argue the Orioles have even better internal options than Mark Canha, but he is at least an option for them this offseason. Now, number 5 on this list, I would say, gets slightly more exciting, at least in name value, and that is Tommy Pham, the 36-year-old right-handed hitting outfielder who split his 2024 between 3 teams, the White Sox, Cardinals, and Royals, and the free agency matrix from John Becker predicting a 1-year, $3.25 million deal for Pham this offseason. So similar to Canha, very cheap 1-year deal with not a lot of risk involved. Now, he signed kind of late last year with the White Sox going through the offseason. And honestly, he was not bad in a White Sox uniform. About 300 plate appearances over 70 games, above league average as a hitter. He was still productive. Then he was traded to the Cardinals at the deadline, his old team. He was pretty bad in St. Louis for 23 games. Then they waived him. The Royals picked him up on waivers as they were trying to find some bats in their postseason push. And he was even worse with the Royals. I mean, he didn't hit at all, basically, with Kansas City in about 23 games as well. So he finished the season between the 3 teams, 116 games, 478 plate appearances. Pham slash 248, 305, 368 for a 91 WRC plus with a 7% walk rate and a 22% strikeout rate for the veteran righty. He definitely did have some solid drop-off in his hard hit rates, in his barrel rates this season. You can see the age starting to take a toll on Tommy Pham. I mean, you can see that in his production as well, like a 91 WRC plus, it's kind of been some up and down years he's had lately, but that's certainly on the low side of production you have seen from Pham. Now, he still does a solid job in terms of impacting the baseball, and he can still really crush a fastball. If you look at his numbers against four-seamers, he's just not the player he once was, and that's what happens most of the time when guys turn 36 in the majors. Now, the good things are he still doesn't chase really at all outside the strike zone. He still does not have very high strikeout rates. He can still draw a walk when you need him to. He's pretty limited in center field defensively, but he still can play all three outfield positions, even at this age, which is certainly a good sign. And again, he's similar to Canha, where it's like, if you get Tommy Pham and you lose Santander, and that's the best you do is Pham, you're probably not in love with that, I would say. Again, a guy who can hit some lefty some, and maybe could also platoon in right field with Heston Kjerstad, something like that. But the other thing Pham could bring to you is really that edge. And this is a guy, just personality-wise, who does not fit in every major league clubhouse. He has certainly bounced around throughout his career. St. Louis, Tampa, San Diego, and then, the last couple of years really bounced around with the Reds and the Red Sox and the Mets and the D-backs and the White Sox and the Royals. And he's been around in different clubhouses, and sometimes it really works, like it did for him in Arizona, where he was kind of a leader of that team, traded to the D-backs at the deadline last year down the stretch and helped kind of will them to the World Series in 2023. I think he was important in that Royals clubhouse down the stretch this year to get them to the ALDS, but sometimes, and we know that the incident with Jock Peterson and other things, it just doesn't work with who Tommy Pham is. But this is something we talked about since the Orioles' early playoff exit. Like, this O's team maybe feels like it needs an edge in that clubhouse, and that doesn't mean Pham at this point with his lowered production is the right fit. But maybe if you do add a good right fielder and then you add Pham as your fourth or fifth outfielder to be one of the last guys on the bench and give you a little production, he can give you a little bit of that edge as well. Maybe it feels like this team needs, especially as it gets to the postseason. So just something maybe here for the Orioles to consider. But those two guys, again, as I mentioned, Pham and Canha, they could even be added if the Orioles make another better addition in the outfield. But the guys in the top four that I'm going to talk about, those are closer to guys where you would be like, yeah, this is our replacement for someone like Anthony Santander. We'll get to number 4 and 3, two guys who kind of had some revivals of seasons in 2024. We'll get to that coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by SelectQuote. The World Series, the Super Bowl, the Olympics, the world's top athletes get to play in these top-level sporting events thanks to one thing: teamwork. And teamwork can also protect your financial legacy and your family's future. SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents are the perfect teammates when shopping for customized, affordable life insurance. They can find you the right policy to keep your financial legacy safely in your family's end zone. And as I mentioned, in sports, winning is everything. That's why you always need a good strategy to keep you moving towards the goalpost. Winning strategies for life are just as important. That's why on my team, I'm looking at life insurance through SelectQuote to protect my legacy and my family's financial future. And all these policies are more affordable than you think. You could get coverage for up to $1 million for as little as $20 per month at SelectQuote. They shop and you save. So get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/lockedon. Go to selectquote.com/lockedon today to get started. Again, that's selectquote.com/lockedon. And this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by the DK Law Group. When you need a law firm, do you want the legal runaround, or would you rather have a no-nonsense approach? Well, you get the latter with the DK Law Group. The DK Law Group specializes in real estate law, estate planning, business law, and family law. They're tech savvy, they treat their clients like family, and they focus on keeping your legal solutions simple. And the DK Law Group knows that speed is key. By leveraging technology, DK Law Group streamlines the process to serve you better and faster. So contact the DK Law Group today at dklawmd.com. And Locked On Orioles listeners can call today to schedule a free 30-minute consultation when you mention the tagline, Empowering Legacies. So as we continue on our Orioles right-handed hitting outfielder free agent wish list for the O's, let's move on to number 4 on my wish list. And that is certainly a breakout candidate from this year, and that is Jurickson Profar, the 31-year-old switch-hitting outfielder who spent his 2024 season as a miraculous all-star with the San Diego Padres. The free agent matrix by John Becker predicts a 3-year, $45 million contract, so $15 million a year for Jurickson Profar. Now, you may know Profar from back in the day as the former number one prospect in baseball with the Rangers. There was a whole lot of hype around this guy, and he just kind of never put it all together, right? He had some good seasons there. 2020 in the shortened year, he was good with the Padres. 2022, he had like one good year in Texas. That was in 2018. But otherwise, he couldn't hit. He could not hit at all. He was versatile defensively, but wasn't as good as they thought he'd be. And he kind of, I mean, again, he's stuck in the big leagues as a utility player, but kind of mostly turned into a bust from what he could have been. But he finally had the full breakout season in 2024 with San Diego, a year where he signed late and signed a 1-year, $1 million deal with the Padres to basically be their utility man and their final guy on the bench. And that turned into an all-star and one of the best hitters in a star-studded lineup. Profar continued to do what he had always done in his career. The one thing he had done well is avoid strikeouts and walk. And he did that to the extreme. 11% walk rate to a 15% strikeout rate. That is very close to an even walk to strikeout in the major leagues. That is very, very impressive what Profar was able to do. And he had always done something close to that. The issue was he never hit the ball hard. He never hit for power. Quite frankly, he never hit for average. He was just putting the ball in play and hitting weak grounders to second base. Like that's what you would see from Jurickson Profar. But that all changed this year. How did he go from a 78 WRC plus in 2023 between the Rockies and the Padres to a 139 this year? He was an everyday player for the first time. 158 games, 668 plate appearances for the Padres this year. He had a 139 WRC plus, slashing 280, 380, 459 with 24 home runs. He stole 10 bases. He was worth 4.3 WAR according to FanGraphs. He was just incredible. It was finally the year people have been waiting years and years and years for from Jurickson Profar. And how did he do it? Well, he finally started to impact the baseball. I mentioned he struggled last year with Colorado and San Diego. Again, if you're watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But right now, I'm showing the 2023 Baseball Savant page from Jurickson Profar. As you can see, didn't strike out, walked a lot, didn't chase, didn't swing and miss. He was able to kind of hit the sweet spot a good amount. But look at those barrel rates, 4%. Hard hit rate, 32%. Exit velocity, 86 miles an hour, all in like the bottom 10 percentile of Major League Baseball. Just wasn't impacting the ball at all. Now watch this. I am moving it over to the 2024 Baseball Savant pace. So he's still not chasing, not whiffing, not striking out, walking even more. But look at the hard hit rate jumping to 44%. Look at the barrel rate up to 7%, more league average. Look at the average exit velocity, 91.1. That's in the 80th percentile in baseball. It was an amazing jump that Profar made. His 12.6% increase in hard hit rate from 2023 to 2024 was the biggest jump that any qualified hitter in the majors made from last season to this season. And his jump in average exit velocity when he added 4.6 miles per hour was also the biggest jump in the big leagues. That is absurd what Profar was able to do from year to year at age 31. And really, I mentioned he's a switch hitter, but he didn't really have any splits. Like he was good against both sides, 137 WRC plus against righties, 147 against lefties. And that is so, so valuable as a switch hitter. It's something we've seen recently from Anthony Santander, where he's just good from both sides of the plate, which could make Profar a perfect replacement if Santander does walk. And the other thing was like August was his worst month, and he had a 102 WRC plus in August. He was still an above average hitter in his worst month. He basically didn't slump for the entire season. It was amazing what he was able to do. And I know Orioles fans like clutch, and the O's had some issues with runners in scoring position and coming up in those key moments, especially in the second half. You want clutch? If you believe in it, look no further than Jurickson Profar. In FanGraphs high leverage scenarios, in which he had 61 plate appearances this year, which is a pretty hefty chunk, they describe those high leverage scenarios as basically it's late, there's runners on, it's a close game. You kind of know a high leverage scenario when you see one. Profar hit 489 in high leverage spots with a 327 WRC plus. Now, of course, both those stats led all of baseball in high leverage spots. But think about this, and I'm going to show the list here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page if you're watching. This list is via FanGraphs. Here is the top 10 WRC plus in high leverage scenarios this year. Jurickson Profar, number 1 at 327. Juan Soto, heard of him, number 2 at 241 in basically the same amount of plate appearances. That's how much Profar is clearing Juan Soto in these situations just for second place. That is how absurd Profar was this year in those big high leverage spots. You want to talk about runners in scoring position? He hit 321 with a 165 WRC plus. I mean, that's absurd. He was 7 for 9 with 2 grand slams and 19 RBIs with the bases loaded this season. That is unheard of. Now, all of that is to say, can he repeat it? Because he's 31 years old. And again, we know he has the talent as the former top prospect, but he had never done anything close to this before this year. Now, again, he did it in a full season for a good team, good lineup around him. And it's not like he's 36, he's 31. Can he do it again? Defensively, he's a little limited in the outfield. I think he could certainly play right field at Camden Yards, but probably not going to put him out there in left field at this point. He's not as versatile defensively as he used to be. So the question the O's have to ask is if he is going to cost something like a 3-year, $45 million deal, not too expensive, but you got to make a commitment to Profar. Can he repeat it? Because there are going to be some teams who are going to be willing to overpay for Jurickson Profar because of that season. Are the Orioles going to be one of them? I would think no, but I'd certainly be excited still if they brought him in. Now to number 3 on my list, and that is an old friend, a guy that Orioles fans know so well, and unfortunately a little too well. That is Randal Grichuk, 33 years old, right-handed hitting outfielder who spent 2024 with the Arizona Diamondbacks. The free agent matrix predicts him for a 1-year, $5 million contract this offseason. Very cheap for a guy in Grichuk who could be a really nice fit on this Orioles team, because similar to Profar, although Grichuk has been a more productive hitter throughout his career, clearly, than Profar has been, just had a dynamite offensive year by WRC plus at 139 this year. It was the best season of his career. Now, he did have his breakout season in St. Louis in 2015. He was 23 years old, first full season of the bigs, had a 138 WRC plus with the Cardinals. He had never really matched that until 9 years later. He does it with the Arizona Diamondbacks. And it was quite a thing to watch this year. He'd basically been a below average season the last 3 years with Toronto, with Colorado, and then with the Angels a little bit last year. Like it looked like Randal Grichuk kind of lost that edge at the plate, but he's kind of that 23-year-old guy again with a better walk rate, had a career high 7.2% walk rate, had a very much career low 16.5% strikeout rate. I mean, this is a guy who, when he had that great year in St. Louis, struck out 31% of the time. He did it half the time this year while still making good contact with the baseball. His batted ball data got slightly better, but nothing crazy, but it's always been good for him. He's always hit the fastball well, but this year he hit 333 against fastballs. That will certainly play. And maybe the big difference, now you could say, here's the caveat, the big difference might have been he was mostly used as a platoon guy. Grichuk this year, 106 games, only 279 plate appearances, so not a gigantic sample size. Hit 291, 348, 528, again a 139 WRC plus, 12 homers. He hit for power because he mashed lefties when he got the chance. He was mostly used against lefties. He had 95 plate appearances against righties, 116 WRC plus. That's very good. Had 184 plate appearances against lefties, had a 321 average and a 151 WRC plus. He was a lefty masher. He was essentially in a platoon with Jock Peterson for the D-backs, who was a righty masher, and that platoon worked to perfection. That was one of the big reasons the Diamondbacks had the number 1 offense in Major League Baseball this year, and that's how bad their pitching was, because they still found a way to miss the playoffs. Now, he used to be a center fielder, didn't play center field this year. That was the first time he had ever not logged an inning in center, but he's still solid in the corner outfields. And we know him well because in 63 career games against the Orioles, Grichuk has hit 323 with a 1064 OPS. He does not have better stats against any other Major League Baseball team. But here's the thing. He can't hurt the Orioles if the Orioles just sign him to play for their team. And I get maybe he is a platoon bat. But if you're going to make that move, if Santander walks, where you're going to give a good chunk of playing time to Kjerstad in right field, and you want to make that platoon move with a righty, if Grichuk really is only going to cost 1 year and $5 million, that is a no-brainer for the Orioles. He can still play the outfield, he can still run a little bit, and he can mash. And a Grichuk Kjerstad platoon, I don't know if that's Santander production, but with what Grichuk did in Arizona last year, bring him to Baltimore. Let the long nightmare of him killing the Orioles be over. Let him help the O's with what he can do in the box, especially for a contract that cheap. But Grichuk is not number one on my list because the top two guys are guys who are going to cost a little bit more, but the upside is much, much, much higher. These guys much true replacements if Santander does walk, and we'll get to those two to finish off the wish list coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $5, or they bet $5, they get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So it is my Orioles free agent right-handed hitting outfielder wish list. We're kind of assuming here that this is a situation in which Anthony Santander signs elsewhere. We're talking about what the O's could do in his place. And some of these guys, like even Randal Grichuk and Connor and Pham, you could pair them with Santander and they'd be good platoon bats. But the guys in the top two of my list, those are guys where Santander is elsewhere and you're signing someone to fully replace him in right field. And number two on my list is Tyler O'Neill, the 29-year-old right-handed hitting outfielder who spent his 2024 season with the Boston Red Sox. He had spent his entire career with the Cardinals since coming up in 2018, was traded to Boston last offseason in the final year before free agency. And the John Becker free agent matrix has his estimation of his contract being 3 years and $42 million. That is $14 million per year this offseason. Now, Tyler O'Neill went absolute scorched earth this season after really back-to-back pretty much average offensive years in St. Louis that were marred by some injuries. Well, he had a few injuries this year. He dealt with a concussion early in the year. He had a knee issue, had a leg infection at one point. But when he was on the field, O'Neill was unstoppable at times this season. 113 games and 473 plate appearances for the Red Sox. O'Neill smashed 31 home runs with a 131 WRC plus. He hit 241, 336 on base with a 511 slugging on the season. His 11.2% walk rate was the best of his career. However, the 33.6% strikeout rate, that was fairly high, and we will get to really how high that is. But with Tyler O'Neill, you kind of start with the red flags that he has because it's been a career of injuries. He has never played more than 138 games. That's what he did in St. Louis in 2021. 113 games this year with Boston, second most games he's played in a season. And he's been in the bigs since 2018. So that is certainly a little concerning. Injuries has always gotten to him. And to me, he's kind of like a mini Giancarlo Stanton. He's not fully built like Stanton. He's still much more agile. He's also younger than Stanton is, O'Neill being only 29. But with no other way to put it, Tyler O'Neill is just so jacked that it seems like he falls into the Stanton category where it's like so jacked and such a big guy that sometimes things just pull, things tear, things happen more so to him than they do to slimmer players just because of the body type. And he almost doesn't look like a baseball player out there at times. But when he rakes, he absolutely does. But that is the thing that you're worried about with Tyler O'Neill. If you're given a 1-year deal, you don't care. But if you're giving a multi-year contract to Tyler O'Neill, you are worried certainly about the injury history that he's had. He's spent time on the IL in pretty much every single season of his career. But if you can keep him healthy, he will mash for you. His sprint speed has dropped to about average. He's now just kind of okay in a corner outfield. He's not the same outfielder he was either early in his days in St. Louis. but he can mash, especially against lefties. I mentioned his full stats this year, but against left-handers, it was unbelievable. Tyler O'Neill had a 215, that is 215 WRC plus against left-handed pitching this year. That means he was more than double as good as a league average hitter against lefties. Let me put that into perspective. Again, if you are watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, you're going to see this chart right here. This is via FanGraphs. This is the top 10 hitters this year, qualified hitters against left-handed pitching. The only guy who was better against lefties, you may have heard of him, was Aaron Judge with his 236 WRC plus. Only Aaron Judge was better than Tyler O'Neill. The rest of the guys to round out the top 5, Jose Ramirez, Yordan Alvarez, and Ketel Marte, basically all MVP type players, with Tyler O'Neill smacked in right there at number 2. That is how dominant he is against lefties. But the thing is, he still hit righties. I mean, he was closer to league average against righties, certainly. But he can still hit them enough where he can be, if he stays healthy, an everyday player for you, where he can be solid against righties and be absolutely unstoppable against left-handed pitching. And the Orioles will certainly take that. Now you add him in with just some numbers that are absurd. A 17.3% barrel rate this year, 5th in the majors. Let me name you the 4 players who had a better barrel rate than Tyler O'Neill this year. Aaron Judge, Shohei Ohtani, Giancarlo Stanton, and Juan Soto. You may have heard of those 4. Tyler O'Neill right in the mix with those 4 guys. How about a 49% hard hit rate for Tyler O'Neill? He's got elite bat speed. He walks. He actually doesn't chase all that much. He got a better than average chase rate. And all of that is great. The O's need more right-handed hitters. I think he can play right field at Oriole Park. But it is certainly a high-risk, high-reward signing. Now, 3 years, $42 million. It's not the biggest deal you could give out. It's not the biggest risk you give to a player. But it's not just because of the injuries that he's risky. It's also because of that strikeout rate. I mentioned Tyler O'Neill had a 33.6% strikeout rate. Among players in Major League Baseball who came to the plate at least 450 times this year, those are guys who played most of the season, basically. Only Zach Geloff of the A's at 34.4% had a higher strikeout rate, struck out more often this year than Tyler O'Neill. And that's the thing that the Orioles struggle with at times, their strikeouts anyway, and you would add extreme K rates to this lineup with O'Neill. He is very much high risk, high reward, because if he taps into the power like he did this year, and again, we're talking about his second best offensive season where he had a K rate that high. So he can strike out 30-some% of the time and still be really good. We saw it this year in Boston. The bigger thing is probably health, because the 2 years he's been healthy was 2021 in St. Louis when he had a 143 WRC plus with a 31% strikeout rate. And then this year in Boston, the only 2 years he's played over 100 games in a big league season. So health is obviously the number one risk. And then if you can get the strikeouts, maybe just, 28% instead of 33%, but he can still produce like that. So yes, those are 2 things you're going to be worried about. And I'm honestly much more worried about the injuries than the K rate. But man, oh man, that power from the right side is something the Orioles have kind of lacked since Ryan Mountcastle lost that power a little bit. And he's got massive upside. But that stuff I talked about is why he is not number 1 on the list. And that is why Teoscar Hernandez comes in at number 1. The 32-year-old right-handed hitting outfielder who spent his 2024 season with the Los Angeles Dodgers. The free agent matrix predicts a 3-year, $70 million contract for Hernandez this offseason. Now, he's already been connected by multiple reporters to the Orioles that they've been interested so far this offseason. And he's also the most expensive option, but he's coming off the best full offensive season of his career. Hernandez in 154 games, over 650 plate appearances with the Dodgers, career high 33 homers, hit 272, 339 on base, 501 slug. That's a 134 WRC plus. He upped his walk rate to 8.1%, lowered his strikeout rate to 29%. Everything went well for Teoscar Hernandez this year. Barrel rate, 14.9%. That's absurd. Hard hit rate, 47%. Great. Good bat speed, all that stuff. And he does strike out a good amount, just like Tyler O'Neill. He does swing and miss a good amount, just like Tyler O'Neill. But the good stuff outweighs the bad stuff for Teoscar Hernandez. I mean, he just mashes the baseball. Now, his defense did kind of tank this year. He had -9 outs above average in the outfield, but he still runs well. He's still 83rd percentile sprint speed. He's still got really good arm strength out there. And I think he could still absolutely play right field every day at Oriole Park. Now, If the Dodgers have Teoscar near the top of their wish list to bring him back, I would think they would be able to outbid the Orioles to get Teoscar back. But if the Dodgers are looking elsewhere and they are willing to let Hernandez walk, this is the guy the O's should be all over. Because if Anthony Santander is not back in Baltimore, I get that Heston Kjerstad's there, and I get there are other options that you can roll through in right field. You can make it work with Kjerstad and a lesser signing like a Mark Canha and an Austin Slater, a Tommy Pham, whatever, and you can make it work out there in right field, and they got the talent. But if the O's really want to try and do their best and match the production with a replacement that Santander gave them this year, Teoscar Hernandez gives them the best chance to do that. So it is a little more expensive, 3 years, $70 million. And it's going to be a little tougher. There's going to be a lot of teams bidding on him, a lot of rich teams like the Dodgers to bring him back. But he should be at the top of the list. And there's always that reported interest, which is great. But if the O's want to show they're serious with David Rubenstein and actually going to spend some money this offseason, there are other guys they can do it on. But if they lose Santander, give me Teoscar Hernandez in orange and black. And really any of these hitters could be Orioles, and they could be working with Sherman Johnson next year. That is what we'll get to on Monday's episode. Sherman Johnson, who's been in the O's minor league system as a coach the last couple of years, reportedly will be the third member of the big league hitting staff. We will get to that on Monday, along with some minor league signings, some news and notes about some upcoming deadlines for non-tenders and Rule 5 protection and all that good stuff is when we're back on Monday's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.